science, but I didn't know many of you actually. So it was great to get invited to come here, and great that you were all here. And I hope we can see each other in the future, in the near future. The topic that I chose to talk today is not necessarily the nitty-gritty of the science that I do, but I hope it's something that will really help you in your classroom or help us collaborate in the near future. And certainly help you teach or help your students learn more about science. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit today about science communication and what are the opportunities for learning from the review process. Okay, this is my email. I apologize, I still don't have my little cards because I just got here. But I think the email is also somewhere in the folder, so you'll be able to track me down if you choose. Okay, so I just wanted to give a little background. Who am I and how did I become a scientist? And when I think about my science career, this is what kind of I think about. It was not necessarily the most linear track, and I did a lot of things, but the underlying story has a lot of consistency to it, and I think that that's what drives me to talk about what I'm going to talk to you today. So I don't want to bore you with that, but I started in Brazil. I'm from Brazil, and I had, of course, a wonderful family that supported me and had wonderful examples of people that were engaged in science, and that helped me get engaged in science. So I decided very early on I wanted to study life science, so I decided to study biology, but somehow my family decided that I should also study medicine. So I did both. I got a degree in biology, and then I got an MD, and then I kind of went off track a little bit. Not off track, but off track in other people's ideas of what scientists should do. I went on to do my master's in philosophy of science, because I decided that to really become a great science, you need to know what science is. Not just by doing it in the lab, but also by thinking as an outsider perspective. We are social beings, and we do science as a social activity that somehow is biased by our culture, by our history, by our times. And the more we try to say, no, we're scientists, we don't have those biases, the more those biases are there for us. So I wanted to understand this a little bit more. So I went on and I did a master's degree in philosophy of science and science education. During this time is when I started realizing I really couldn't necessarily talk about my science to other people. Every single day I would sit down at the lunch table with my parents, and my dad would look at me and ask me the same question. So honey, what is it exactly that you're studying right now? And I just, every single day I already expected that he would come back and ask me the same question, because I wasn't able to tell him exactly what I was doing. So from that point on, I decided that my role as a scientist was also to be able to communicate and tell people what is it that we do, how is it that we do what we do, and make sure that this work can go across. My dad is an architect, so he's far away from biology, but still, I should have been able to tell him what I did so that he could tell his friends or other people what his kids do or what I was doing. Then I did really a big detour. I went to the Amazon and decided to become a family doctor for a while, just to decide, do I really want to be a doctor or do I really want to be a scientist? And at some point, I really can't do both at the same time, or I felt I couldn't. So I went to the Amazon, I became a physician for 2 years, and then after that I said, okay, I really know. I graduated, I have an MD, but I'm not a doctor. I want to come back to science and do science. So I came to the Bay Area for the first time, and I stayed here for 8 years. I did my Ph.D. at Berkeley, and that's where I started studying plant biology. So I totally left the medical field. I work in plant development and evolution and genomics. So I study how plant genomes evolve and how developmental genes evolve so that we see the diversity of plants that we have around us. So after some years at Berkeley, I came back to Brazil. I became a professor of health sciences back home at the Federal Institution, and recently, as I said, 3 weeks ago, I came to Hayward. So I'm at Cal State East Bay as an assistant professor for molecular biology, and my lab is there. And that's what we study. We study development and evolution of plants and evolution of plant genomes. So if you are interested in any of that, or you want to learn how is it that we do in the lab, what is it that we do in the lab, you're more than welcome to come and talk to me. Okay, but something was consistent, as I said, something was there, even though I did all kinds of things and I went all over the place. Something really remained with me during this time. And this one is my love of life science. I just love since the beginning, since I remember myself as a person, I always loved life sciences, anything related to it. And I loved it through two different aspects. I loved to learn about it. I wanted to know everything that scientists knew about living creatures, but I also wanted to understand how is it that we get to study it and we get to learn about life sciences. So I wanted to look at not only the scientific knowledge, but I also wanted to understand the nature of science, specifically life sciences. But I also developed this love for teaching because I had to tell my dad every time the same thing, and I realized, well, there's some missing link here that I need to address. So I started developing my teaching skills. I taught a lot back home before coming here. I taught at Berkeley, and I always think about teaching through two perspectives, right? How to better teach scientific concepts. I'm always asking myself every single day. I teach almost every day at Cal State. Every single time I go into the classroom, I'm thinking, how can I better, what's the best way I can teach this topic to the students? And every single day I ask myself this question. And there's a lot to be done there, right? There's a lot of research. There's a lot that we know, but there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of research that we can do in classrooms to try to understand how to better teach different scientific concepts, but also how to better communicate. And that comes back to my dad, right? How is it that I wasn't able to tell him in a very direct way what I was doing so that he was able to understand and he would stop asking me every single day, what is it that I was doing? Right? So those things really bring me to what I want to talk to you today, because I want to talk to you about this opportunity that is very interesting and that can help us all not only better communicate scientific knowledge, but also how is it that we can help kids learn through the process. Okay, so this is what you have in your tables. I hope you had the chance to take a look at it. It's Frontiers for Young Minds. Frontiers for Young Mind is frontiers in general. If you maybe you've heard about some of their other journals, they have many journals in all kinds of different areas. Frontiers for Ecology and Evolution, Frontiers for Plant Science, and those are very well known and well regarded scientific journals that people can publish on. This specific area of Frontiers for Young Minds is, as it says, science edited by kids and made for kids. So the cool thing about Frontiers is it's a non-profit, so I'm not getting paid to tell you about Frontiers. It's a non-profit. It's an open access scientific journal. And it has publications that are written for kids and also reviewed by kids. So the kids get a chance to actually review the science, the writing, the manuscript that is presented, because it's presented for that audience. And it's supposed to be for kids between ages 8 and 15. Okay, so I guess that most of you are teaching some science class for this age group, and I hope that that's the case. So those are the topic areas that we have at Frontiers right now. So for example, astronomy and space science, understanding health, neuroscience. And I am an associate editor for the Understanding Biodiversity, that is one of the most recent areas of frontiers, and there is also Understanding Mathematics. So those papers, that's how they look like. Pretty cool, like really neat, interesting pictures, graphics, and whatnot. And it was created in 2003 by the efforts of Robert Knight. Dr. Knight, he's a neuroscientist from UC Berkeley, and he decided to start communicating his science to kids. And he stepped up and he started doing the mentoring of review processes of those articles, of those papers with kids. And now he's the field chief editor, so it's the boss of the boss. But he's still very engaged, and it's very amazing to see him. He's a very well-regarded scientist, but very committed to science communication. So in the process of reviewing a paper, who is involved? Of course, the first are the young people, right? The students are the ones that serve as reviewers from ages 8 to 15. And you, as science teachers, can host those review sessions in your classrooms if you feel like it, or if you feel that the topic matches what your curriculum, you can have review sessions in your classrooms. And that is, it's not that you're just going to have the paper and then be on your own. You're actually going to be paired up with someone that has more experience. If you feel that you don't have enough experience with peer reviewing, you are going to have someone paired up with you that's called a mentor, that is then going to help you and guide the students through the review process. And then, of course, the expert researcher who's actually writing the manuscript and submitting the manuscript to the kids. And so now we have lots of chief editors for the different sections, right? So this is the chief editor for my section, Chelsea Specht. She's now at Cornell. She was my Ph.D. advisor. That's how I got involved in all of this. But they're all over the world, and it's very, very cool. And there are 5 basic steps to get the review process going, from the time that the paper is submitted to the final publishing of the paper, and we're going to go through them quickly right now.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I wanted to Janice Martine?
What?
From, oh no, wrong person. Okay.
Jeremy, yeah. Okay. He's Jeremy from Kansas. He's from the mathematics. He's kind of new to the team too. Okay, so we have the 5 steps. And the first one is, of course, to identify something that has happened recently, recent discoveries, or also core concepts that are fundamental in those areas. And we feel that they should be taught or should be understood by the students. And the way we do it is basically by our editorial board. We look through publications, and if we find something that is really cool, we go there and nudge the author. Hey, do you know about frontiers? Would you like to write a piece for frontiers? Here's how you can do it. And then we hope that the person is going to get excited about the opportunity. Or scientists that already know about frontiers will volunteer directly and say, hey, I really want to write for kids. I do this cool thing, or I discovered this cool process here, and I really want to tell them about it. And then they volunteer and they submit their papers. Or, all our partner organizations here, their editorial board can nudge us and say, we have a really cool paper, this edition, or this volume, and maybe you guys want to check it out and talk to the author, see if they want to submit a paper. So those are the general ways for submitting papers as researchers to Frontiers. And then we gather the team, which is the team of a mentor and the team of kids that will then now read the paper and make useful criticisms. Right? So the paper is written with this in mind, with this age group in mind, 8 to 15, and that's where most of the bottleneck comes in, because it's not trivial for a scientist to write for kids, right? It requires a set of skills that not all scientists are ready to or to fulfill, because we're used to writing for other scientists. We're full of jargons. We have so many terms. We have so many specific ways that we're very clear-cut and direct in what we're saying, but that doesn't necessarily work when we're writing for young kids or for kids aged 8 to 15. But anyways, those are the 6 areas, as I said. Whenever one paper comes in, we decide which area it should go to, whether it should go to neuroscience or to Earth and its resources or biodiversity. And we, either the person already submits in one of these areas, or we direct the paper to one of these areas. And the papers could come in two different formats. One format is the new discovery paper, which is something new that has just come out, and the researcher will then talk about their new discovery. Or in the other side, experienced researchers in a field can decide to talk about a core concept that is important and that they feel like it would be important for kids to learn about it. So those are the main 2 categories of papers that are there, and you can see in the website. Okay, so this is the challenge here, is to fit everything you want to say in 2,000 words, because the text can't be too long. Is to make sure that the reader will understand at least 85% of the words that you're writing down, and understand that not everything fits a single paper. So, we are very excited about our research, but we have to make sure that we break it down so that we really don't miss the focus or the point. And we need to make it clear for the audience and the vocabulary and all of that. So this is a point that for me is really interesting. As we do this and as we build up those papers that are resources and they're open source or everyone can use, we're creating resources for teaching because it can be used in classrooms. But we are also creating resources for scientists to become better communicators. And that's where my dad comes back again. I really think that this is wonderful and a wonderful opportunity for teachers and kids to work together with scientists so that this communication can really happen. So that the scientist is able to say what it needs to be said, but in a way that everyone can understand, including the students. Because all scientists have this fear that their research is going to be misinterpreted by the media, and then will end up in some really exquisite interpretation later on that has nothing to do with the original research. So this is a fear that always happens. We want to communicate our findings, but we don't want to have them taken out of context. And because of that, the best way is that we scientists that do the research communicate the research. Don't let other people communicate for you. Try to be an agent in the process of communicating your own research, so that this miscommunication doesn't happen, or happen in a lesser degree. Okay, so once the paper is written, it's written for the audience, which is the young mind. Then we're gonna be reviewing the paper. We're gonna get a group together of a mentor and the young minds that are now going to read the paper and are going to give them feedback on the paper. Okay, and the cool thing is that we can have those sessions happening individually. If you know a kid that in this age group that would like to engage in the process of reviewing a paper, you can pair up with a mentor and help the kid review a paper. But it can also happen in the classroom, and it has happened a lot in the classroom. A lot of people that are engaged are former researchers that are now teaching, and they are also the mentors. So that can also happen in the classroom. Or it can really happen here, which is really cool, a live review event. And this is what I'm trying to set up, maybe with biotech stuff, hopefully in the future. But if that happens, I will reach out to all of you to see if you're interested in engaging in and having the students come to a live review event where the students are sitting there and the researcher is there and they're face to face and they're discussing the paper and they're saying what works, what doesn't work, and how it happens. And that at the end of the day, the researcher will then revise the paper and the manuscript according to the criticisms and the debate that happened with the kids live. So it's really interesting. Okay, the science mentors are researchers in experience, with experience in peer reviewing. So if you have participated in peer reviewing and you know about the process, you can become a mentor if you will. And they will basically encourage the students to read critically and give honest and constructive criticism on the piece, on the paper. And of course, while doing it, it will also introduce the young mind to the life as a scientist. We as scientists peer review a lot of papers every year. I get, 10, 15 papers every single year in my field that I have to peer review. And it's part of my profession. It's part of being a scientist, right? So this also teaches them what's like to be a scientist, or at least part of the job. And also, while they're doing it, they're also learning about the science behind that publication, right? So once the review process is completed, it goes back and forth between the kids and the researcher. Then the associate editor will check whether all the changes that were suggested were appropriate and were done appropriately. And once the article is validated, then it goes to publication. So it's basically a quality control of the whole process, making sure that the suggestions were acknowledged, the changes were made, but also the quality of science that is communicated is there. We maintain the quality even though we're trying to communicate to young kids. And then the finished article is published, and the cool thing is that it's freely available. So there's a big repository right now, since 2013, of papers from all kinds of subjects and topics and concepts that can be easily and freely accessed by anyone to be used in the classroom, at home, or wherever they feel like. It's very neat because when the paper gets published, the young review also gets published right there at the corner of the paper together with the authors, so they see themselves and they come out as reviewers of the paper. So they get really excited by it. So they also get credit by doing it. So as I said, those papers that come out, they are under a Creative Commons license, which means that they can be used as long as the initial source is cited, as long as you say this is a Frontiers paper, Frontiers for Young Minds, and those are the authors, you can use it however you want. You can duplicate, reproduce, it's yours to do whatever you want, as long as the source is cited, right? Yes.
So, on your site, we have like students that don't speak English,
Yeah.
so they can see the translations also?
So that's something that we're working on right now. So not all languages are being translated. I work with the Portuguese team to translate from English to Portuguese. Everything is in English now. And we're trying to get them in all kinds of different languages. But it's not fully done yet. So it's a working process. But if you have, for example, Spanish-speaking students or Chinese-speaking students or bilingual students, they could potentially be engaged in helping translate the papers to other languages. right now, because we're beginning the translations, what happens is usually we give it to a translator and then we review as native speakers of the other language, checking with the original paper. But that's also happening, so soon enough we're going to start seeing the same papers coming up in different languages that could also be used the same way. Okay? So as we do it, we're also, as we participate in the review process, the kids, the students are learning about how is it that we review papers, but they're also creating this database of educational tools that can then be used in the future by everyone. So those are the ways to get involved, and that includes hopefully you guys. Download and disseminate the papers. They're there and they're for you. That's why we do it, right? So those are two examples of papers. One talking about marine microbes, and the other one talking about physiology of toddlers' brains and how they react to things that they do wrong. So feel free to browse the website. There's a ton of papers in all different areas. As I said, use it. It's there for you. But you can also, as a teacher, host mini reviews or Young Mind reviews in your classroom. If you are interested in that, just send me an email and we can set up ways that you can host review sessions in your classrooms and help students participate in the review process of a scientific paper. You can, if you feel like or you are engaged in some research and you feel like, you should write a Young Mind version of one of your published articles if you are currently doing any research, or if you're involved in any research in the past that we're talking about core concepts and you feel you can have a good approach on that concept, go ahead and write a piece for Frontiers for Young Minds. Or you can pair up, and if you have experience in peer reviewing, you can then become a science mentor yourself and help students and guide students through the review process. Okay? So I think that Frontiers is a great example of how we can concatenate all of that. We concatenate learning about science as we learn about science. So we learn science as we learn about science. We learn scientific topics and concepts as we also learn how science is made somehow, at least in one aspect of it. And that might help us, because we're building up those tools, those educational tools, that might help us better teach certain topics, certain concepts that we might teach, and hopefully it will better help us communicate what we do in academia. So helping kids become those young minds that can think scientifically, or can at least understand science through a different perspective. So if you have any questions, of course feel free to ask, but you can also email me. I'm right here in Hayward. I'll be happy to talk about Frontiers or talk about my science if you want to talk about my science.
Yes, on the topic of communication, what do you do? What do you research? Let's see how well this...
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned it, but I study the molecular mechanisms of development. So I look at genes that are involved in plant development, and I try to understand how these genes evolve to create different shapes in plants, specifically in flowers. So I work in this new area that is called Evolutionary Developmental Biology, or people call it EVO-DEVO for short. Yes. But yeah, so I look at genes that are involved in flower development. I try to understand, by comparing different species, how these genes change from one species to another, how they're functioning differently, or how they're creating different proteins, or how they're expressed in different parts of the plant when it's developing, or at different stages in development, and try to understand how these changes might explain the diversity we see in floral shapes. And I also work with genomes. Plant genomes are this really amazing thing that they really like to duplicate. I was just telling him that plant genomes duplicate all the time. And they duplicate not just one gene, they duplicate the entire genome. So whole genome duplications are a very common phenomena all across the different lineages of plants. And I try to understand what's the aftermath of duplicating the entire genome. What genes are retained, what genes are lost, and what are the consequences for the plants after those events happen. So if you have any interest in learning more about it or designing activities to discuss with your students about those topics, I will be more than happy to engage in research projects or in classroom activities with you to help you teach that.